Hello, everyone who's joining us now. We will wait another minute or so before we get started to allow people some more time to join. Thank you. I think we'll give it just another minute as there's still some new participants joining. Okay, I think I will go ahead and get us started now. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We are really happy to have you here today. This topic of today's webinar is an overview of the public consultation on the methodology change and requantification procedure. So I'm going to be helping to host and facilitate this webinar alongside my colleague Justin. And the objectives of today's webinar are to provide an overview of the public consultation on the proposed methodology change and requantification procedure, and to answer any questions from stakeholders on how to participate in the consultation or on the proposed procedure itself. I'd like to take a minute here before we jump in to discuss a couple of housekeeping items for today's webinar. Firstly, this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the Vera website after the webinar is over. A copy of the recording should also be sent to everybody who registered for today's webinar by email. We do plan to have a short Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please save all questions for the end. You can put them in the Q&A chat function, which is enabled here on the webinar Zoom panel. There's a chat function, but there actually, I think, is a Q&A panel specifically where you can post questions. There should be an upvote function available, so you can give a thumbs up to any questions that you would most like to be answered. And because you can publicly see questions submitted by other participants, we of course ask that you be respectful and keep all questions relevant to the topic of the webinar. We expect the total runtime of today's webinar to be a little less than 60 minutes. So roughly 40 minutes or so for the content of the webinar, and then 15 or 20 minutes for any questions at the end. I think that's it for our housekeeping items, so I will move this along. Firstly, I will introduce us, the speakers for today's webinar. Myself, I am Nicole Schirmer, Manager for VCS Program Development here at Vera. And also my colleague Justin will be speaking. Justin, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Justin Wheeler, Senior Director of VCS Program Development. Thanks for joining.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Okay. A very quick agenda for today's webinar. We will be going over the consultation process and timeline, so some logistics about how to participate in the consultation using the online form if you have not done so before. We will talk about the background of the proposed procedure, the eligibility criteria, and the proposed steps process for following the procedure. And hopefully this verbal explanation will help add clarity to the proposed procedure for those wishing to participate in the consultation. We will also be going over what type of feedback that we are looking for in this consultation by going over the questions that we will be asking in this consultation. And then a quick overview of the next steps, the timeline to expect, and a short Q&A at the end. Okay, really quickly, a short introduction to what this consultation is. On July 9th, Vera launched a public consultation on a new proposed methodology change and requantification procedure. This new proposed procedure will provide an optional pathway for projects registered in the Verified Carbon Standard Program to update to a new methodology or methodology version for their past verification periods. This would enable proponents to both update the methodology or methodology version that they used for past verification periods, and it would enable them to requantify the greenhouse gas emission reductions and carbon dioxide removals from past verification periods in accordance with that methodology. Once approved, the procedure then enables each VCU holder, including the project proponent, to reconcile the previously issued VCUs and request any applicable labels which are eligible, such as a CCP label or a reductions and removals label. The purpose of this public consultation is to seek input on the procedure's clarity, ease of use for stakeholders, and in particular for project proponents, VVBs, and holders of active VCUs who may be using this procedure. The full text of the proposed procedure and the consultation document is available on Vera's website. You can see the link here, and perhaps one of my colleagues can put the link into the chat for everybody to see. The timing for this consultation is, it will run from July 9th until August 9th. So there is this 30-day open comment period, this webinar, which we are hosting today. In August, we plan to review all of the comments, finalize the documents, and we hope around September to be able to publish the final procedure and have it available for use. Comments to this public consultation can be submitted electronically via the prepared Google form by August 9th. Using this QR code, you can access the Google form and see a preview of it now on your phones if you're so inclined. But you can also access it via the announcement page on the Vera website. We encourage all stakeholders, especially those who might seek to update their project to an ICVCM approved methodology, to provide their feedback on the proposed procedure. When you open the procedure document, you will see an introductory page on the Google form that looks like the screenshot here on the right. You will enter your personal details. You may also indicate whether or not you want your feedback to be published publicly on the Vera website or anonymously. For some questions, which Justin will provide an overview of later, for some questions, all the feedback will be anonymized to protect privacy. And if you have any issues accessing the Google form for any reason, you can email us at programupdates@vera.org. That email will be available on the screen closer to the end of the webinar to request some assistance to access if you're unable to use this form for any reason. And now I will hand it over to Justin to provide the background on the procedure.
Great, thanks, Nicole. So I'm just going to give a quick walkthrough of the procedure and some of the context for why we're releasing this, and then I'll walk through the consultation questions. So this procedure is a follow-up to a commitment we made when we announced our application to the ICVCM, Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, to have the VCS program assessed last November. So we committed to providing a pathway for projects to demonstrate that credits and projects that were initiated under prior versions of the methodology meet the requirements of the latest version of a methodology, and thus enable them to qualify for core carbon principles or CCP labels. In May 2024, ICVCM recognized the VCS program as an approved program under the or as a recognized program. I forget exactly their language. So the CCP assessment framework has two parts, a program assessment and then a category assessment. So the first part was the VCS is now accepted as passing the program assessment. And then in June was the first announcement of many to come on category level approvals. So that was for landfill gas methodologies. We expect another announcement in August likely, based on their regular cycle of the next round of methodologies to be approved under the category assessment against the CCPs. And as we saw in the first decision, the approval was specific to versions of the methodology, and this is something we expect to see more of going forward. Verra also decided to withhold some versions of methodologies or methodologies as a whole in our initial application to the ICVCM. So that was, all of those methodologies are listed on our announcement. So this procedure would allow projects that are using those older versions to update a past monitoring report and the associated VCUs to the latest version of a methodology and thus qualify for labels. It's not exclusive to ICVCM, so it could also be used for a project that used a methodology that has a combination of reductions and removals, where we issue a new version of the methodology that specifies the split between reductions and removals. A project could then go back and use that updated version to quantify how many of its VCUs qualify for reductions labels and how many qualify for removals labels. And there may be other use cases too. So it's a general purpose procedure, but initiated to follow up on our commitment that was made to ICVCM. So jumping into the procedure itself on the next slide, the eligibility criteria are specified in the procedure, and this we're looking for feedback genuinely on all of the procedure, including the eligibility criteria. So there's a couple important things here. One is the project must meet all requirements and applicability conditions of the methodology that they're changing to in order to be eligible for this. So this includes if there's a new type of additionality assessment or anything like that, the project has to demonstrate that they met that and that they have the data to pass a verification or validation that they met that. The verification periods being requantified must be consecutive. So you can do a consolidated request for multiple verification periods, but they must be consecutive and they must include the most recent approved verification period. If you have a request that's in process or under review already, there's already an existing process to say, pause my review, I actually want to update this. So feel free to follow up with the program secretariat on that. You wouldn't have to follow this procedure because no decisions have been reached. And then lastly, retired VCUs are not eligible for reconciliation, and we'll get into what reconciliation means in a minute. Next slide. So the key steps for project proponents, this is a multi-step process. So the first step obviously is to understand the procedure and assess whether or not it's applicable to your project and whether you meet the eligibility criteria and whether it's worthwhile, of course. This is a fully voluntary procedure. Projects and VCUs that were approved under a past methodology are fully valid for use in the market. So we do not expect all projects to be using this procedure. We expect it to only be for kind of specific use cases where it makes sense for you. So assess whether it makes sense for you, make sure you have all the supporting documents and data, and prepare the updated templates and documents. Then you initiate a verification, and that includes validation of the updated project description, similar to how any update of a project description can have validation activities that are included in a verification in the course of a regular VCS project. Importantly, we are, and this is something we're doing in the overall program too, but we wanted to be explicit about it here, you must notify Verra when you start that verification of an updated project description and the monitoring report requantification template. And this is important for the market so that people understand and we can notify VCU holders that this is underway, but also important for Verra for our workload planning to make sure we have sufficient capacity to process these requests in a timely way when they come in. And typically this would be, a month to a few months for a validation and verification process. Once you've completed that validation and verification and have a positive opinion, then you can submit the updated documents, including the validation verification report. And there's some new representations to be signed. So you submit all of that to Vera through the registry, similar to any other normal project request. And there's a list of the documents that are required for submission there. So those are the steps to kind of initiate the process from a project proponent side. And then now we'll kind of go through the steps that happen on the Vera side and VCU holder side. So once we receive that request, we undertake a review, similar to how we review any request for any project. So we'll obviously acknowledge receipt, then we will complete our review. Once there may be some findings or some back and forth in the course of that review, once the review has been completed and we've approved the request, then Vera will notify all VCU holders from the affected serial ranges from the project. And those VCU holders then have a decision to make on whether they want to reconcile their VCUs. So this is something that's obviously a little bit new and specific to this procedure, because those VCUs are the property of someone other than the project proponent. We need each VCU holder to make their own decision on whether they want to reconcile a VCU. In some cases, there may not be a change in the number of emissions reductions and removals that have been quantified under the project, in which case reconciliation is relatively straightforward. If you say yes, we would still cancel your VCUs and issue new ones under the new methodology, but you would get the exact same number. If there has been a change in emissions reductions and removals, if there's been a reduction, then that reduction applies proportionally to anyone who reconciles. So if somebody had originally issued 100,000 VCUs and then they submit their updated documents and demonstrate that they only now have 80,000, then each VCU holder that chooses to reconcile, their VCUs would be canceled and they would be issued 80% of whatever number was canceled, and those new credits are issued under the new methodology, and thus eligible for any labels. The project proponent's credits, both those that have been issued and are held by the project proponent, and approved but not issued credits, are automatically reconciled as part of this process. So the project proponent, by submitting its request, is agreeing to reconcile any VCUs that they hold or are eligible to have issued. Similarly, Vera will automatically reconcile the full amount that was contributed to the buffer pool where that's applicable to the project. And that's updated, that's based on an updated non-permanence risk assessment using the latest version of the NPRT. So sorry, that's a little bit dense. There's a lot of new information there. Feel free to put questions in on that. But that's really the meat of the procedure. The next slide is just a quick note on fees. So there will be fees associated with this process. We are not consulting on the fees, but we want to be transparent that there will be fees charged. So our plan is to have a fixed fee upfront, similar to how there's a fixed fee for a registration request. So this is to cover the processing time for the review team that's reviewing the requests. And then there will also be, or the proposal is there will be a fee for each VCU holder that's issued new credits and wanting to label those credits. So it will be similar to what we used to have as a retroactive labeling fee. So that would be a small per VCU fee. And that's intended to cover the administrative time of the reconciliation process. Next slide. So that's a quick tour of the procedure. Now, the questions that we've asked in the consultation document, I'm not going to read them word for word. These are just copied and pasted from the consultation document. As I said, we welcome feedback on anything. So there is a catch-all question at the end. But specifically, we're asking for feedback on the eligibility criteria. Are there any additional criteria that should be applied, or should there be any adjustments? We're also very curious to know how likely are you to use this procedure if you're a project proponent, and if you could give us a little bit of explanation of your answer. What would be your motivation? Is this something that's being asked for from people who are holding credits from your projects, that sort of thing? We're also curious what types of projects you're most likely to apply this to. Understand that you may not know for sure because it may be pending future ICVCM decisions or things like that, but the more information we have, the better we can plan for workload and make sure we've thought through all the specific examples as we're finalizing the procedure. Similarly, we're very curious to know approximately how many VCUs you expect to reconcile. So there's the exact same question is asked both of project proponents and VCU holders. So this first one is for project proponents. On the next slide, we have the question for VCU holders. So very similarly, how likely are you to reconcile? Why or why not? And then approximately how many VCUs do you expect to reconcile? And this is, again, to the best of your knowledge, but we just want to collect a bit of data if we can to help us with our forecasting. Importantly, for the data questions, both the ones on the previous slide and this one, we will not be publishing the individual responses. So regardless of whether you say disclose my name or don't disclose my name, we will aggregate those. So we will report back on the data we received, but it'll be more like, we received 50 responses and the total number of VCUs expected to be reconciled was X, or something like that. So we'll protect the confidentiality of individual responses there. And then similarly, because of the notification question, we're just thinking through the logistics of the notifications, how much of it we can do by email versus setting up a website or using other tools to notify people that their VCUs are eligible for reconciliation, or that there's is a process underway to do a requantification. So we've put a couple of options in there, and again, please provide further comments in question 6 in general on anything to do with the procedure. One of the things we don't ask about explicitly, but you're welcome to comment on, is the 30 days. So we put that in just to have a little bit of a timeline to provide certainty. But I'm curious if it's the right amount of time or if people would like to have further flexibility around when a reconciliation request can be received. Okay, so that was quick, but that leaves us plenty of time for questions, and I see there's already some questions coming in. So the next steps after this webinar is obviously the consultation period will run for a little while, so please do submit your feedback through the consultation response form. We will review all the comments received and work to finalize the procedure. And our goal is to have a finalized procedure published and ready to use in September. Obviously, once we approve it, it will take some time for projects to decide if they want to proceed and prepare their documents and have those verified and validated. So we expect to start seeing these reconciliation requests either late Q4 or early Q1 2025. So thank you in advance for your feedback, and we'll jump to the Q&A. Just a reminder, please do read the questions that are there and upvote them if there's one you really want me to cover. We have a relatively small group, so we should be able to get through most of them, but we will prioritize based on the upvotes. So the first question is, will there be a vintage restriction to this? Also, how can this apply to projects utilizing more than one methodology? Both great questions. So we have not placed an explicit vintage restriction on this. Obviously, there's going to be some practical limits. So you need to have the data available will be the main practical limit. Also, there have to be active or approved but not issued credits from those vintages. So we think it's relatively unlikely that we would see really old vintages coming in through this, but we didn't want to pick an arbitrary cutoff. We felt like each project proponent and VCU holder is best able to assess whether it's worthwhile to reconcile or requantify older vintages and whether they have the data and information available to do that and pass a verification. So that's that one. Next question, does the revalidation induce a field visit from the VVBs or is it only a desk review? So a site visit is not mandatory in the procedure. That is always up to, so similar to the standard, we have a couple cases where a site visit is mandatory, but other than those cases, the VVB is expected to make an informed decision on whether a site visit is necessary or helpful in reaching their conclusion on the verification and validation. So they need to be fully confident in issuing a positive assurance statement. So depending on your specific circumstances, a site visit may or may not be required from your VVB. Next question. To be clear, this option is available for both project owners, developers, as well as holders of VCUs. Sort of. So the work to prepare an updated project description and to do the requantification request can only be done by the project proponent. They're the ones that have the data. So if you're a VCU holder and you really want this to happen and you haven't heard about it happening, we would encourage you to reach out to the project proponent and say, hey, we want to reconcile our VCUs, please do this requantification. So that will have to be a little bit of a conversation at the front end. Once a requantification request is approved, then each VCU holder gets to make a decision whether or not to reconcile their individual VCUs. So the updated project description and the requantification report and verification report, all that information will be published on the registry once approved. But each VCU holder makes a decision whether or not they want to cancel the credits they're holding and replace them with credits issued under the new methodology. And then that will also be reflected in the registry. So currently, the registry doesn't show versions of methodologies, or it just tracks the methodology title. So we're developing a supplemental template that will be posted that will say which serial ranges from a requantified period have been reconciled and which ones have not. Next question, can you clarify if there's a separate process to update to the latest methodology for the current and future verification periods if no VCUs have been issued and there's no desire to requantify? Yeah, great question. Thank you for clarifying that. So the VCS standard already allows a project at any time to update to the latest version of a methodology or even to switch to a new methodology if applicable. There's not a huge amount of guidance in the current documents, so we are working on a guidance document just to provide some additional detail, in particular for the RED projects, because all of the RED projects have to transition by the end of next year to VM48. So there's some further guidance on that forthcoming, but yes, that's already enabled in the standard, and you don't need to follow this procedure to do that. You can just roll it in as a normal project description deviation with your next verification report. Next question, will there be a period of time between canceling VCUs and issuing new credits? Not a long period. So there is some processing steps that the registry team will have to follow, similar to some of the other registry operations, but I think usually they strive for kind of a day or a couple of days maximum, business days, of course, to process those requests. So there will, of course, take some time to do the review and approval of the documents, But once that's approved, each VCU holder, the intent is as soon as a VCU holder says, yes, please reconcile, that will be a very quick turnaround on canceling and issuing those new credits. And then a gap between canceling and issuance should be almost non-existent. So, maybe there'll be a couple seconds or something between when your credits disappear and when your new ones are issued, and we can check with the registry team. So feel free to follow up with a specific email if there's like a concern about a time of zero balance for contract reasons or something there. I'm sure there's something we can do to manage that. So feel free to follow up. But the intent is that those would be coincident in the registry, maybe a couple seconds delay or something. Next question, who do you plan to train VVBs to make sure that the job is well done and consistent between projects? So that's a great question. When we release the procedure, we will do a dedicated webinar for VVBs to make sure they understand what's expected of them. And then we, of course, have our VVB performance management system that's up and running now, run out of our program management department. So the expectation in terms of quality for VVBs will be the same as the expectations for the rest of our programs, which is very high. And we'll make sure to reach out to VVBs in a dedicated session and answer their questions and make sure they're fully aware of this procedure. And we, of course, welcome feedback from VVBs on the procedure during this consultation period. Next question, could you clarify at which stage of the process that the project developer will know the conversion ratio of quantities? So the project developer will know, I mean, it may change during the course of the verification or review, but as soon as they prepare the documents, the project proponent will know whether there's a change in ERRs for the period and how big that changes. And they can make an informed decision at that point whether it's worthwhile to proceed with the process. So if you see, a 10% reduction in expected VCUs, but you expect to see a 10% or more uplift in value, then maybe it's worthwhile. But in some cases, maybe you don't expect to see that return in terms of increased value, so maybe it's not worthwhile. And that's why this is a fully voluntary procedure. But the project proponent should know right away. The VCU holders and the public will not know until the request is approved. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that it's the right calculations before we start issuing numbers, similar to any verification request, where obviously the project proponent knows when they request verification how many ERRs are being verified. The VVB knows because they have to verify it. But until it's approved by Vera, that information is not up and public. So if you're a VCU holder or an investor or someone else with a stake in the project, you can, of course, communicate with the project proponent and come to some agreement on information sharing if that's important to you. Next question. Thank you for this. This is very important. If one VCU holder applies for the revision, does the change apply to all VCUs for the project? So the answer is no. Each VCU holder, so the requantification is done for the whole project. That information is public, but each VCU holder decides whether to reconcile their VCUs. And when they say yes, they're only deciding for the serial ranges that they actually hold. So in the example I gave of previous approved number was 100,000, revised approved number is 80,000. Each VCU holder is deciding whether to cancel their VCUs and get 80% reissued under the new methodology. And any VCU holder that we either do not hear from or that says, no, please don't touch my VCUs, they'll be left alone. We'll not touch their serial numbers. Next question, another VVB one. From a VVB perspective, do we have to consider methodology update and requantification like a gap validation? No, so a gap validation under the VCS program is a specific term for when a project is moving across from CDM, most typically, to the VCS. So it's validating any information that was not provided under the other program that's now required under the VCS program. It's more like a two-part thing. So, and this is the way we're thinking about it for our review. It's a validation of an updated project description. So similar to how you would validate a project description deviation, plus a verification or re-verification, if you'd like, on any monitoring period that has been changed. And those updates to a monitoring period are contained within a requantification report, is what we're calling it. Feedback welcome on the term. That's just what we thought was most descriptive of the process. So it's more similar to if you were doing a verification of a new period, and that included a project description deviation to update to a methodology as part of that verification engagement. Next question, without knowing which methodologies will get the CCP, responding to your survey will be difficult. So we recognize that. There are a few things that are known. So obviously the landfill gas announcement is out. We expect to get some more decisions in early August on the next round of methodologies. And then there are a number of methodologies that we withheld from our application. So those for sure are not going to be approved for CCPs. And that's old versions of the cook stove methodologies, both the CDM and the revision to the CDM that's in VMR 6. So yeah, respond based on that information, and feel free to qualify it in the comments and say, I'm a renewables project proponent primarily, and so I need to wait until a decision is made, but if necessary to update, because my projects are not held, I'm very likely to update, or I'm somewhat likely to update. So if you could just answer to the best of your ability based on the information you have, and then add a comment on, you won't be able to answer this until a formal decision is made, or something to that effect. That's still really useful information for us. My favorite. So the next question is about jurisdictional and nested RED, JNR. And my apologies, I'm not an expert on JNR, but I'll do my best. How could this affect nesting under JNR? In other words, if projects are currently negotiating with national focal points on nesting with national forest reference lines, could this recalculation need to wait until after the nesting has occurred? Yeah, I think I'll have to, Brian, if you could send us an email actually, and we'll get our RED team to respond to that specifically. I don't want to give incorrect information, and I don't understand the details of how nesting negotiations with national reference lines work. So I'm going to say I don't know, but we'd be happy to get that information for you. So either send us your email so we can follow up, or send us a separate email to the program updates email address that's shown there, and we'll have our RED team respond directly. Is there a protocol for the VVB to follow for their verification procedure? And is this protocol available for project proponents to view? It's a good question. We haven't drafted anything explicit about this yet. So if there's a need, please feel free to give us that feedback. If we do publish any guidance for VVBs, then it would be public guidance, and even the webinar that we host for VVBs will also be a public webinar, and we'll post it on the website. So we don't have any kind of secret information that goes just to VVBs that project proponents can't see. But at this point, we have not prepared any specific guidance for VVBs. Our expectation is that this is using the same procedures that are used for verification and validation. It's just the only thing that's unique is there's already been a previous statement for the same period that's being updated, which is not unusual, right? Like you could have a case where a project prepares an initial draft of its monitoring report for a period that was a few years ago, and then there's some findings, so they have to go back to the drawing board and update their monitoring report, and then the VUB has to restart the verification activities on the new monitoring report. So our assumption is that there are already existing procedures that largely cover this, but happy to get feedback if there are specific needs for guidance for VVVs. The next question is a very good question, and that's why I kind of prompted the feedback on the 30 days. So let's say a VCU holder did not reconcile their credits within the 30 days, then they sold the credits to another market participant. Will the new owner be able to reconcile, or this is an irrevocable process? So as currently drafted, it's a one-time option, reconcile or not. We were just discussing this yesterday, in fact, though, that there could be this case, and does it really make sense to restrict a new VCU holder if all the information is available? So please give us feedback on that. I think we can certainly consider opening that up so that each VCU holder has the same rights, regardless of whether they happen to hold it during that 30-day decision window. The downside, of course, is then it kind of stays open, so to speak, on the registry. But maybe it's worth it. So if that's something that you think would be very useful, please give us that feedback. Pascal, a VCU holder must be informed as soon as the process is started and public. Otherwise, Vera may carry legal issues as it may impact the price of credits of the VCU holder, especially if there's strong requantification, meaning a big difference. Yes, so that's our intention. Well, that's our plan proposal in the procedure, is that once we receive that notification, which comes at the start of, so that's another reason for the notification, when it comes at the start of the verification validation, then we would post that publicly, and we are planning to, and we're still figuring out the exact logistics, but planning to do some directed reach out to all VCU holders for that project, or serial ranges of that project, to let them know that this process is underway. So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to comment on the legal issues, but our intention is to be fully public and transparent about the information that we receive, so that everyone knows that this process is underway. Could this procedure apply to the LOA of host countries getting a corresponding adjustment label? I need a clarification, Pascal. I'm trying to think of how it would apply. So labels can already be applied retroactively. So if a host country were to say, you know what, we authorize back to 2021 this number of credits from this project to be transferred under Article 6.2, we would already enable labeling of those projects. So I don't think you would need to apply this procedure, because you wouldn't need to update the methodology. If a host country for some reason said, we're willing to authorize, but only if it's under the latest methodology or something like that, which, I mean, a host country can put any conditions they want, then yeah, conceivably a project could use this procedure, update to the latest version of the methodology, show the host country that they've done that, and then get the letter of authorization and request the labels. That's the only example I can think of, but Pascal, feel free if you have an example, or reach out if you'd like a follow-up discussion on that point. I'm curious to think it through a little more. Okay, that's the end of the questions. We do have a little bit of time left, so we can give it a minute or so for any new questions. Otherwise, maybe just to reiterate, thank you very much for your participation today. And thanks in advance for providing feedback on the procedure. The form is live, the website's live, the links are all there. For this webinar itself, we will post the recording and slides as always, and it'll go on the same announcement page just down at the bottom. So if you want to forward that to colleagues or contacts, feel free. And we hope this is a useful thing that we've prepared for the market. I think the initial reaction has been encouraging. And yeah, maybe to reiterate one more key point is this is fully optional. Credits that have been issued under the rules of the day are fully valid and can be used by anybody. This is a targeted procedure for cases where someone has a specific reason where they need to update to a more recent methodology, and most likely that is to obtain labels of some sort, but fully optional and flexible. One more question just came in. If holders of VCUs from the same project have VCUs derived from out-of-date methodologies, and others have VCUs issued under the latest methodologies, does that not create a two-tier market? Would it not help the integrity of the market if all VCUs are issued with the latest methodology? So it's a good question, Phil, and an important point. I mean, I don't know about a two-tier market. There's already a wide diversity of credits that exist in the market. So we always have grace periods whenever almost always, unless it's a correction or clarification, whenever we are issuing a new methodology or an update to the rules. We can't penalize someone who invested in good faith and started a project under the rules of the day for not being able to predict the future, that those rules might change, especially like, emissions factor changes or something like that. So I think there's a balance to be struck between applying the latest available knowledge and information in the market and providing a pathway for people to update and demonstrate that they've updated to that where it makes sense. And certainly on a go-forward basis, there's always a date where those new rules are required for everybody, either for all new projects or in some cases like the RED methodology, we're actually requiring legacy projects to transition over. But there's an important kind of procedural fairness, stakeholder fairness, investor certainty element to not doing a surprise rule change and forcing that on people mid-project when they invested and undertook activities under a certain set of rules and expectations. So that's why this is an optional procedure. But yes, our assumption is, people are only going to undertake this procedure because there are costs associated with it, both on the proponent side, VVB costs and fees to Vera. So people are only going to undertake this where those costs are outweighed by benefits, namely increased prices for their credits. So you certainly could see a situation where different portions of a serial range from a single monitoring period would have different prices if one VCU holder chose to reconcile and one didn't. But we felt like that was tolerable in the context of needing to give each VCU holder the right to choose whether the credits that they bought are being changed on them. So the default is we don't change things that people have already bought. This is a new thing where there's a process for people to request that we make that change. And a final comment, good initiative, curious to see if it can work for RED. Yeah, thanks for that. Obviously, the data availability will be a key constraint for RED. There is a period of data that's being prepared anyway to facilitate the transition to VM48. So our anticipation is that it will work for that period, but some further process may be needed, or there may be periods where it can't work because the data is just not available. So it's we certainly do not expect 100% of existing credits to be eligible to participate in this procedure. It'll be some subset where people have all the data and information and where it's worthwhile. But thanks for the support, Pascal. Okay, thank you everyone for your time. Oh, one last question. Is ICVCM backing you 100%? Have you, example, a project has 80% of the credits issued. What if the process gives a reduction of 50%? So ICVCM is fully aware of this procedure. We discussed it both informally and gave them formal notification that we were preparing and had launched the consultation. ICVCM cannot pre-approve, of course. They need to maintain the integrity of their process, so they won't give kind of a formal decision on it until it's fully issued. But all discussions to date have been positive. This is aligned with their intention. As long as people are fully following a approved methodology and demonstrating they meet all the requirements, then we don't anticipate any issues there. But of course, we have to let ICVCM come to their own conclusions. And I think that holds regardless of the percent change in the credits. So if a project is fully ineligible and then it updates, whether it's a large or a small percent change in the VCUs that results from that update is kind of neither here nor there, I guess, as long as they're updating to a methodology that has been accepted or approved as meeting their assessment framework, then we anticipate that their view on it will be the same. But I need to be cautious to not speak for them, of course. Okay, thank you everyone for the time and all the great questions. I hope this was useful to you, and we look forward to your feedback. Have a great day.